Thank you for joining us today. My name is Eva, and I will be your host for our webinar on the best practices on intelligent content with senior analyst Robert Rose. I'm glad to have you all here today. As some of you are dialing in, I will provide you with some housekeeping announcements, but before we get to that, I would like to introduce you to the sponsors who brought you this webinar, Hippo CMS and Kanban Solutions. For those of you who are new to Hippo, Hippo is on a mission to make the digital experience more personable for every visitor. We're redefining the CMS space by engineering the world's most advanced content performance platform, designed to help businesses understand their visitors, whether they are known or anonymous, and deliver the content they value at top speed in any context and on any device. Together with our global network of certified partners, Hippo serves a rapidly growing number of enterprise clients around the world and has headquarters in Amsterdam, Boston, and Germany. Our services partner sponsor for this webinar is Kanban Solutions, one of our US certified partners. Kanban specializes in solutions that benefit from intelligent content principles and require integration and implementation of both commercial and open source software, including content management, commerce, and related marketing technologies. Kanban offers the intelligent content and engineering strategy as the starting point for organizations looking to optimize their content, customer experience, and technology initiatives. So, before we start, we have some housekeeping. Today's webinar will last just under an hour. We've got one guest presenter, and yes, our most popular question, a recording of the webinar will be made available to you afterwards. In fact, you can visit the URL you're watching this webinar on now to see as an on-demand version. So you can share it with others, maybe embed it in a blog post, share it on Twitter or Facebook, and of course, we hope that you do. Also, please use the rating system on the way out the door to give it a 1 to 5-star rating for the quality of the webinar today, 1 being a low score and 5 being the highest. And there will also be a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please keep your questions coming by using the questions button in the webinar display panel. We will try to answer as many questions from the audience as possible within the time remaining. All right then. We are broadcasting today from Amsterdam, our Hippo headquarters in the Netherlands, and I'm proud to welcome Robert Rose as our presenter today. Good day, Robert. What time is it for you today?
It's always great to be here, Eva, so thank you for having me. The interesting thing is that I'm actually not at home in Los Angeles today. I find myself in the lovely city of Detroit, Michigan. So it's actually not as early as we usually do these things. So it's just around 11 a.m.
That's reasonable, right? That's reasonable.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's in the Netherlands. It's after 5 p.m. now, so we should do this more often these times.
Yeah, exactly.
So. Excellent. Well, I know today's topic is a passionate topic for you, Robert. It is a topic following the Intelligent Content Conference in Las Vegas last month, where you were a keynote speaker. I was wondering, could you tell all the people, including me, who weren't so lucky to join in Vegas, how was the conference? Did any magic happen there?
It was great. It was really, really wonderful to, the conference has been going on for a number of years. I think this is the 8th or 9th year for it. And this year was particularly interesting because we were really talking about content strategy as it pertains to marketing and building business effectiveness. And so with that theme and trying to find meaning in all of this sort of chaos and noise that's out there, there was a lot of things that came out, but I think most pronounced was how even the practice of content, even our jobs are really evolving, and that's certainly one of the things that we'll focus on today.
Well, I'm looking forward to hear more about that. For those of you who do not know Robert is also the author of the book Managing Content Marketing, and he's a recognized expert in content marketing strategy, digital media, and the social web. Robert is a strategist in residence and brand advisor for the Content Marketing Institute, senior analyst with the Digital Clarity Group and featured writer and guest blogger for a variety of online magazines. I hope that, I'm sure that it doesn't sum up entirely, but just a small amount of information about Robert. So Robert just said he will share with us today, his key takeaways from the Intelligent Content Conference, I may say. And, with that, Robert, I would like to hand it over to you.
Well, fantastic, and thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. I think what we'll talk about today are those best practices as they pertain to what we really sort of saw at Intelligent Content, and hopefully I can sort of capture in the next 40 minutes or so some of the wonderful things that we talked about at Intelligent Content, and certainly not just me. I was the keynote there, but many of the thought leaders, including, of course, some folks from Hippo that were also there as well. And so, as I mentioned, the theme was sort of finding meaning in the mystery. And that was our theme for the entire show, because what we've seen is that there's this real struggle right now for content to find its sort of goal, to find its, reason for being in the organization. As I've often said, content is really the last asset in the business that's not managed as strategically as it should be. Nobody quibbles about legal or sales or marketing as a process, but we often really struggle with this idea of content, this thing that we produce more of than anything else in the business, as being a strategic asset that's really worth managing as such. And so ultimately what we, as I opened up this keynote, I wanted to talk about this idea of humans, the people in the business. And so this presentation, and certainly the theme throughout the Intelligent Content Conference, is less about how many presentations you'll go to will help you optimize things for the business, optimize strategies for the business. What I'm hoping that Intelligent Content did this year, and what I'm hoping this presentation does a little bit, is it's less about how to optimize the business and more to how to optimize you within the business. And so how do we start to optimize our jobs and what we're doing in content in our business to help the business, certainly, but to also give us sort of a future and give us an optimal role within what we're trying to do in that business. And so to start off with, I sort of kicked things off with this idea. My keynote in the beginning of the conference was about the future of content. And I'm going to come back to that after I touch on some of the best practices of what I think the future of content really looks like. And I'll close today's presentation with that. But it really is in our ability to change the business. So often that we focus on content goals rather than business goals. And that's really, sort of when we get to the nut of it, it's really about how do we solve business problems with content. That's where the value in the future of having a career in content will be. And so to kick things off, we sort of looked at, okay, content, this once and future king, right? You've all heard the term content is king. Content is king, and content is king. We've been talking about content being king for years and years and years. And now all of a sudden we're starting to see a lot of people who say, yeah, you know what? It's not. It's more confusing than that, right? So this headline says content isn't king, influencers are king. And we see other headlines that are out there that say, no, content is no longer king. Actually, distribution is actually king. Or we see other headlines that say content isn't king, actually. It's about trust. Trust is actually king. And building trust with customers is actually king. Or another headline that might say, no, content isn't king. Actually, your buyers are king. Or another headline we might see where it says, content isn't king after all, community is actually king. And so now we're starting to get a little more confused, and we're saying, wait a minute, content isn't king. Who's king? Community is king? Actually, no, content isn't king. It's the kingdom, says this one person in the headline to a blog. It's the kingdom. It's not king. This is my favorite of all of them, where it says, content isn't king, it's actually queen, and for some reason, technical SEO is the British government. That's better be my favorite headline. I don't even know what that really means, but it's pretty funny nonetheless. Content isn't king, actually, conversations are king. Content isn't king, we've got to be conversing. That's what's really king. No, actually, usefulness is king. Content isn't king, it's really about usefulness being king. And no, content isn't king, actually, promotion is actually king. Less content, more sharing, promotion is actually king. And then Content isn't king. Actually, no, relevance is king. So developing relevance is actually king. And then to finally and end this up, Gary Vaynerchuk, who I love and his books are really great, he says, no, if content is king, then context is God. So we've gone all the way to God here. And this is just to show you how confused we are with the purpose and the reason that we have content to begin with. All of those things, if you start to sum them up, are of course about delivering some kind of value to the business. But the priorities of which and what we're trying to do with content in many ways can be so confusing. And where do we actually focus to make our content actually intelligent? And what I say is actually content isn't king. No, content isn't king. Content is actually coal. Content is coal. It is simply a raw material that we can do something with and hopefully do something valuable for the business. We can squeeze it really hard and make something like a diamond out of it and really, really process it. Or we can spew it out into the atmosphere, into the digital atmosphere, and everybody will choke on it. Content is simply coal. It is a raw material that we can use and do productive things with. And that's our job, is to actually do something productive with it. That's how we make it intelligent. And one of the main reasons that we haven't done as much intelligence with it as we might is because, quite frankly, the content technology revolution has been realized at the expense of the value of content itself. It used to be, back before we had CMS systems and before we had publishing tools, that creation of content in business was actually very considered. It took weeks and months to get an ad done, and now we can do it in a matter of minutes. It took weeks and months to actually get a video or photography or anything visual done because you had to hire professionals to do it, and now our iPhones capture video in the same resolution that's being projected on cinemas. We can create the democratization of content, and the tools that empower us to actually publish to digital channels has really increased our ability to do so and decreased our value that we place on creating the content to begin with. And that's what we need to rediscover as we start looking at content and its purpose in the business. And so as we start to think about that, and that was sort of what I teed up in my keynote address to the audience. And so three major themes or takeaways sort of came through that. And I'll touch on these three major takeaways and then get into some of the best practices that actually came out of that. And so the first one, the first sort of major theme here, is that strategic content is really about those business goals, not content goals. So content is simultaneously, we realize, becoming more important in the business and more difficult to manage. So in order to truly drive the value for the business, those that manage content, those of us that manage content, we've got to start to focus much more on business objectives that are trying to be reached rather than simple content goals. There was a wonderful workshop at Intelligent Content Conference called Getting Personal, using content modeling to improve customers and make them feel unique. And in that, Kate Kenyon, who's just super smart, she said that, quote, to design content as an asset, meaning a valuable thing to the business, you have to design it for a particular business outcome and then decide how to assess its performance. In other words, everything we create as a piece of content has to associate itself with a business goal. And if it doesn't, we have to ask ourselves why we're actually creating it to begin with. And the second day, in her keynote, Andrea Ames, who she leads content experiences at IBM, she said something really similar. She said, what answers are you looking for when you're designing content, when you're creating content? If you're ever going to measure performance of content, you've got to use the information to actually improve something for the business. So then, secondly, the second sort of major theme here, technology is important, and we know the importance of technology, but humans were more important. So the technology that we use to manage our content is, of course, we need that to scale. We need that to automate things. We need that to help us. But as also Kate Kenyon said in her session, a big content management system, it requires talent. How much technology do you really need? You need to ask yourself that. Hippo's own Aryeh Khan, the CTO of you guys, he sat on this panel. He was hosted by my colleague, Tim Walters, and he summed up what I thought was really great with the challenge of content management technology when he said, you need a CMS that focuses on delivering consistent content across your digital touchpoints. It's basically that. That's what a content management system helps you do. Preferably, he said, in a personalized way. And to do this properly, you've got to add structure. In other words, you've got a human create a human understandable structure to your content in order to be able to let the technology optimize it in a relevant and personal way. And then additionally, in the day one closing keynote, the content strategist, Karen McGrain, really smart content strategist, she was encouraging everybody in the audience to be really careful about how they make assumptions about how your customers and the kind of content they want may dynamically present itself on a mobile device. So her session was on this difference between responsive content design and adaptive content design. And her major point was that personalization and content optimization, if you just simply use some technology to look at your device and sort of optimize it automatically, that can backfire on you if you don't have a smart strategy that looks at the human behind that mobile device in the first place. And then finally, B2B marketing strategist, Ardith Albee, who I adore, of course, highlighted all the differences of personalization. And she discussed that basically when you look at it, 99% of the business, what they're really looking for are content targeting based on a persona, not personalization, because quite frankly, most businesses can't create the velocity and quantity of content that is needed to create true personalization. So start to look at persona-targeted content, not necessarily personalized content. Then, the third of the major themes here is really understanding that customer journey comes before you develop your content strategy, not after. And that was one of the most recurrent themes at the conference, was this idea that we've got to understand the customer's need first in terms of our content. Again, my colleague Tim Walters there, he suggested that we had to find individual moments of truth within each of our content strategies. So as we start putting together a content strategy for technical documentation versus landing pages versus customer community, what is it that our customers need first from that experience? What is that moment of truth? And then how do we actually present it to them? And Naz Urbina, who's another really smart content strategy guy, he pointed out in his session, he talked about journey mapping for personalization across multiple channels, that businesses are going to have to get out of their corporate silos and start developing content journeys from the perspective of the customer. As he said, quote, you have to understand your key personas from their journeys before you make any content model that you can optimize. And so with those three sort of overriding sort of themes, we can start to look at sort of three sort of takeaways here to look at how we might start to develop a process that adds value to the business there. So tools and technology, how do we start to think about selecting tools and technology that support this idea of intelligent content? Two, the content model as the sort of connective tissue for a strategy. And then three, really starting with small focus areas, starting small and iterating quickly to expand across all parts of the buyer's journey. And so let's look at each of these sort of in turn here. So first of all, the tools and the technology. How do we think about this? And so when we're thinking about the tools that meet this idea of intelligent content, it's really understanding how content flows or really performs in the business. So managing the performance of content is really the new management of it. It's not good enough simply to just approve it and push it out to different channels. That's table stakes. You have to be able to do that these days. It's not good enough to just have a content management system that simply, quote unquote, makes it easier for content contributors to update the website. You've got to get beyond this thinking. It's just never going to be, quite frankly, easy. And if that's the number one priority for your business, guess what? You're going to be disappointed because this isn't a problem with technology. This is a problem with the complexities of where we live in today with the digital channels and the world we live in. There are just too many people creating content, publishing content, and optimizing it. So we have to think about how to manage enterprise digital content to perform. That's what we need to do. If all you need to do is update a blog or create landing pages or update a homepage, there are plenty of no-cost solutions and, quite frankly, automated solutions at some point which will do that for you. Understanding how the complexity of business and content performance happens may be the most differentiating thing you can do in the business. And that's because we live in this really complex world today. So in other words, we start thinking about how do we integrate content and facilitate it across all these different multiple channels. We've got internal groups that can create content and how they collaborate on how it performs together to drive a business result through whatever you do, content marketing, inbound marketing, direct-to-consumer, landing pages, etc. In other words, our content creation strategies are hardly simple and straightforward. And honestly, hopefully, they're unique to our business. So we won't ever want our management system to be so simple that it's cut and paste and publish. We're looking for levels of complexity that help us develop sophisticated content display and publishing models that help us do that. Editorial velocity, flexibility in the business, and content performance that starts to listen to the behavior of our customers and then using technology to optimize the content based on listening to that. And that's really key as we start looking at content modeling, the connective tissue to all of that. So that brings us back to this sort of second piece and the idea of content modeling, right? What is content modeling to begin with? And the original big takeaway at ICC in their workshop, as Kate Kenyon was talking about, was to design content within a model, you've got to design it for that particular business goal. And that's what a content model is, and it's a really important thing to start to think about developing. It's basically a system or a document or a methodology, if you prefer, that just simply documents and makes clear across all the different silos all the different types of content you'll have for an application of it. It's the definitions or descriptions of each content type's elements and their relationship to each other, including the business goal. So for example, you might have a thought leadership article content type as part of an overall model. You could propose that, okay, all through thought leadership articles, they include both a short title and a full title to make these articles better able to mold themselves to social media sharing or fitting within different aspects of the website design, right rail versus main site versus how it's going to appear on a mobile site, et cetera. And you might even mock up the way of a properly structured thought leadership article and how it'll appear in various channels like Facebook, Twitter, Google, LinkedIn, blog, mobile site, et cetera, et cetera. That's the connective tissue that you're starting to develop with an approach within content modeling for each type that you're trying to do this. So now why would you go to this much trouble? Because it builds that connective tissue with your content's performance. And when you've got a clear platform and a structure for content, it helps to manage that performance, and it helps you optimize that performance and leads to, one, a content strategy that is central, end-to-end, connecting through tissues the digital experiences that you're creating. So how approaching content as that strategic asset, it enables these differentiating experiences, and connecting them is essential in understanding the buyer's journey in both your digital and physical world. And this helps you to scale. It helps you to be powered by this structure, which then enables real-time insight and feedback and gives you the ability to be agile. So when you're evaluating, adjusting, justifying strategic choices, the teams need to understand what's happening in real time, not 1 or 2 months previous, but in real time is how you're looking and being able to adapt in that. And that gets to the next level of WCM, Web Content Management. It's a more evolved content management strategy. So this content model provides that way to connect all those content experiences together. And that sounds overwhelming, I know. It sounds big and giant, and how are we ever going to do that? And I mean, I wish we could spend a whole webinar on just the content model piece, but there's plenty of great thought leaders out there helping you develop content. I urge you to sort of Google the content model and really start to think about that. But it really brings us to the third best sort of takeaway, best practice here, which is starting small. This is a process. It is an iterative process, and it needs to start through growing specific focus areas. So as you start thinking about something, really that small focus area is, how do I get shorter and shorter times between the time I get insight and my ability to act? It's the biggest thing we see and the biggest challenge we see in most organizations is the insight we glean from data and how quickly we can act on that insight by publishing out an optimized piece of content. You know, and you can measure that all the way down to real time, where it's optimizing literally as people are surfing your content. But even if you can just shorten it down to get to where we're actually making sure we're effective, you know, this is getting more agile and adaptive with our processes, our human processes, not just our technology process. So we need to focus on new goals, building these audiences across platforms so that we understand them better and how they're using our content across all these different experiences. In other words, where did they come from? A Google search, great. They surfed the blog. What content did they search? Great. Now we understand what content we can optimize our website to help them find the products that they're looking for. Great. Now that we know the products that they're looking at, we can optimize the offers to them that we want to provide, and so on and so forth. It builds on each other. And that's how we make sure we're working effectively with the assets we have. How do we assign the most efficient editors to projects? How do we articulate ROI and react effectively to this changing strategic needs? And what content works for whom? And where do we first apply the content modeling? Where do we have content gaps for existing personas, or where are the emerging personas? And using our technology to help us make faster decisions about this stuff. And so those best practices kind of bring us back to where we started, and how I started with the keynote and the conference, and my focus, my small focus for change, which is helping content practitioners really get to an optimized career path. And so my suggestion for the audience, and hopefully my suggestion for you today, is to get on the practitioner of content. That's the through line in all of this, the human, the content practitioner in the business itself. And so when we start thinking about the customer experience, you think of it like this. We look at the research that's out there, and we see that customer experience is a huge piece of what we're doing these days as content practitioners, marketing practitioners, business practitioners. We are focused on creating optimal digital customer experiences across the entire buyer's journey. But in fact, it is the totality of all of those individual experiences that make up the customer's experience. And so we have to get good at all of it. And if that means reducing the number of experiences we actually create so that we can focus on the quality, that's what we absolutely have to do. Because when we think about it, it's really about creating really creative and optimal experiences at very few parts of the strategic journey. So there's this guy at Deloitte Consulting called John Hagel, and he's written an article, and I just really love it. He talks about this idea of really content driving out into even business models. And what he talks about is, he says, there's this advent of big data, and we start looking at big data, sophisticated analytics, social software, Internet of Things, cloud computing, and he actually says it's not just a pivot in the way we go to market. He thinks it's actually a pivot in the business model. He says the idea of the trusted advisor business model now has the potential to expand from the niche of the very wealthy to really become a mass market event. What he means by that, what he's talked about with that, is he started talking about the idea of how companies would start to really pivot with their content to really provide, what we would call thought leadership today, what we would call content marketing today, and I will call creating optimal digital customer experiences, to really become someone that is trusted in the marketplace. And so if that means recommending competitors, it means recommending other solutions based on the fact that we're wrong for you, then so be it. Now, I'm not quite prepared to go that far in terms of using our content to recommend competitors, but I think it's an intriguing thing as we start looking at the future of content and our role within it, within the business, because it's a really interesting sort of model when we start to think of what does our future look like as a content practitioner within our business? How are we strategic within the business? And so what you're looking at on the screen now is something that if those of you who sort of did university for economics, or those of you who know a lot about economics, you will recognize this as this traditional marginal cost curve. And the way you read that, it looks like a Nike swoosh to me, but here you go. It's the marginal cost curve. And what it basically says is that as you start to develop quantity of anything, this is the traditional model, a quantity of product, your costs go down until they don't anymore. And then they start going back up, and what you're trying to do is increase demand to the point where your costs don't start to exceed the marginal revenue that you have over as you develop more quantity. In other words, you can't always depend on more and more and more costing less and less and less. It actually starts to work against you over time. And so the idea in the marginal cost curve is that you're supposed to think about increasing demand at a balance where you sort of stay in that lower left-hand quadrant, if you will, sort of optimizing your quantity as you optimize the marginal revenue that you get so that you actually make money, that you actually profit. Well, I see something really interesting and a similar pattern emerging with content and how we manage it in the business. So there's two things that drive the marginal cost curve: efficiency and demand. In other words, can we get more efficient about the way we're producing stuff, product, and can we increase the demand for it? And so with those two concepts, I really started to look at the history of content and what we were doing with content in the enterprise in an intelligent way. And here's what I told the attendees at the Intelligent Content Conference. I said, look, when we started back in the day, before pre-digital, up in that upper left-hand corner there, we start to see the strategic value of content is very high. And why was it very high? Because as I mentioned earlier, it was something that we had a considered approach for. It was just difficult and expensive to create a print ad. It was just really hard to create something for television. It took money, it took expense, it took effort and time, and so the strategic value of content as it was portrayed out for customer experiences was quite high. You can think about going back to the Mad Men days all the way up into really pre-digital and how difficult and considered a purchase it was to create content. Well, digital changed all that, of course, because now we can produce content, we can shoot photographs, we can create infographics, we can dash off banner ads, and basically the strategic value of content has decreased in the business, coming all the way down to where it's really a marketing tactic at this point. And we looked at a marketing tactic pre-2010, and we said, hey, there's this great marketing tactic we can do. We can build websites. We can send emails. We can create banner ads. We can create blogs. We can create all this stuff. And it really helps us become publishers, become media companies. We can publish content out, and we can really just drive it out. And that's what we did. We didn't think about how to do it intelligently or structured, or we just started dumping content out. We started publishing more and more and more stuff. Now, as we've started to get into 2010 and into 2015, that rise in strategic value, because guess what? It worked. It started to work. We started to get more leads. We started to get more loyalty. We started to nurture leads better. We started to increase sales price with the optimizing of content on our digital channels. And so it started becoming a marketing strategy, the idea of content as marketing strategy. And then as we start getting nearer to 2020, what we're starting to see is that the structure, the application of intelligent practices, actually reducing the amount of content that we create, the quantity, and managing the efficiency and the demand of it, can actually turn it into not just a marketing strategy, but a business strategy. Not just solving a marketing problem at the top of the funnel, but solving business and creating experiences that business can actually get around. So content as a business strategy, not just a marketing strategy. And then ultimately, if you subscribe to what John Hagel was talking about at Deloitte, you can start looking at this as a business model. Now, again, I'm not quite sure that I'm ready to go there yet, but at least I can see the pattern looking very much like a marginal cost curve here, where we're starting to see the strategic value of content rising, and thus our need to do it smartly and intelligently increasing. Now, the interesting thing here is, to me, is what we see is this, what I call the wall of anxiety here, the business anxiety. And we pierced it twice. We pierced it once when the strategic value of content came through and pierced down where it became so low level in the early 2000s, late 1999, early 2000s, maybe even up until social media got a hold, where everybody could create content. Anybody can publish content out to the web. We're hiring interns to do our social media programs. We hire our nephew to do our website. We didn't really put a lot of strategy, and we pierced that wall of anxiety once. And now I think we're in that model of piercing it again. We're just entering this place where content is becoming such a strategic investment for the company that, quite frankly, big C-suite level people are scared. They're looking at this and not understanding how it can actually increase demand for the business and also be done at an efficient level to actually help us create an efficiency that drives value for the business. And it is up to us, the marketing practitioners, the content practitioners, to help the business pierce this wall of anxiety and increase the marginal value up until the point where it becomes strategic again, and maybe part of a business model that we would recognize in the future. So what does all this mean? What do we think about this sort of in the sum of the best practices that we got out of ICC? What does actually all of this mean to us? Well, it means ultimately, I believe, that content will not be a role or a department in the business. The skills, the approach, it'll be institutional. It'll be an institutional competency in the business. In other words, content will be something that is just a high degree of skill in all of the other departments within the business. It will be managed by the core elements of the business. In other words, whether that's called creating customer experiences or marketing or sales or loyalty or whatever, I believe that content as a skill, as a role, will start to diminish, and we will need to be providing business roles with content-related skills. The strategic use of content will be solely focused on creating efficiency and or demand for future use of content. And so when we start thinking about our jobs in the business as content practitioners, this can feel different. It can make us feel anxiety. It can make us feel fear, anger even. What do you mean that my job's going away? What do you mean my job as a content manager and managing the CMS is going to be automated? I don't believe that. It's disbelief. And so it's starting to even happen. As we start to look out, we can start to even see this happening. This is a slide that came from the website Martech Advisor, but it was a study that was actually done by the U.S. Department of Labor when they started looking at all of the different kinds of jobs that would be computerized or have a probability of being automated by artificial intelligence or broadly technology. And if you start to look there, and I just picked two categories. They did this across a number of categories, and I picked two, marketing and content creation. And you start to look at the lower end of the scale there. You start looking at things like marketing managers, public relations and fundraising managers, basically low elements of probability of that they're going to get replaced by automation of machines. But then you look at the high end of the scale, budget analysts, statistical analysts, market research analysts, basically those that are processing facts and looking at that data in order to put out some result, a very high degree of probability that those jobs will be ultimately automated by technology in the future. But maybe even more pointedly to this presentation, if you start looking at the content creation side of that, if you look at the top end of that scale, those that are least likely to be replaced by automated technology or mechanical types of apparatus, you see artists, photographers, producers, directors, art directors, writers, editors, people who are doing what? They're adding value to the content and increasing demand for it by increasing its quality to those who consume it, or they're creating efficiency. They're editing it down. They're synthesizing it. They're pulling it in. They're finding meaning in that. They're finding meaning in the content. Those that are most likely to be replaced with automated or technology solutions, technical writers, proofreaders, copy editors, editors in general, those that are actually just automating and or providing a mechanical version of what can be done ultimately by a technology or a machine. And so as we start thinking about our careers, really start thinking about how we can shift our jobs, how we can shift our perspective, how we can shift our businesses into that in which we use content intelligently. Can we start learning how to apply content models in such a way that it adds efficiency to the way that we manage it and decreases our need to produce lots of quality for it in that marginal cost curve? Or can we use our strengths and skills and talents to actually add meaning, add value, write better, create more compelling content, and use the technology to actually help us scale that effort, help us scaling that effort over time so that what we're doing is actually adding value to that content as the business goal, as something that actually adds value to the business goal. And that's an important thing. We've got to get good at this game. And the game is simple. It's content practitioners in our business that manage content technology, that manage content strategy, that manage marketing, that manage customer loyalty. How do we adapt to deliver either more efficiency or more demand for our content? Because that's the way we ensure our strategic position in the business. Because as the strategic value of content increases in the business, so will the strategic value of us if we can deliver on those two things. Intelligent content and looking at things like looking at content modeling, looking at content structure, looking at helping and developing ways to write and develop better content, looking at data and how it improves our business effect. That is what creates demand or creates more efficiency in this particular case. And so what I would encourage everybody to do is, as we're starting to look at the future, is look up. One of the things that becomes so difficult for us as content practitioners in the business is that we're really, really always driving toward this goal of our horizon. And many times we're quite simply looking down all the time, focused on content that is day to day, feeding the monster, trying to do things. And what I would encourage you to do is look up. Find your road and pave it consciously. That's where you're going to find the meaning. That's where you're going to find your path and your strategic road to the future. And that is really ultimately what I hope everybody came away with ICC and intelligent content, and I would thank you for your participation today. I'm happy to take a few questions now in our time remaining, and let you take it over from here, Eva.
Thank you, Robert. That was a very interesting presentation, and thank you for giving us a sneak peek into the future of, exciting future for intelligent content.
I'm sure. Absolutely, my pleasure.
We have already had some questions coming in during your presentation, so let me now just open the Q&A session. So thank you to everyone who already sent in a question. Any additional comments, questions, and ideas, please use the question button or tweet us at OneHippo or at Kanban Solutions. Let me start, Robert, with a question from Chris. You were talking about content practitioners adding value to their content, and Chris was wondering if you could recommend any specific ways for content practitioners to add value to their content.
Yeah, I think, so I look at it on sort of two different kinds of extremes here, right? So one is really understanding how utilizing data really starts to optimize a business. And what I mean by that is one of the things that a content management technology like Hippo and like others as well, one of the things that a content management technology can allow us to do, although it's surprising to me how few businesses actually really do this, is connect all the experiences that we have together. And this was something that we talked about at ICC for sure, but it's something that even much broader than that we talk about all the time, which is, so we're creating, as businesses, many, many digital experiences these days. So we have a blog, and then we have our website, and then maybe we have an e-commerce catalog, and then maybe we have our customer community. And all of these sort of experiences, these digital content experiences, are in many ways siloed from each other. So I'll give you an example. I worked with one company where their blog was run on, it was run on WordPress, and they had it simply set up separately, and it was all over there, and they couldn't use the wonderful content that they were creating, and they had created an audience there, and they had email subscribers, and they had all the things that you would normally associate with a successful blog, but they couldn't use that data to understand how they might optimize their e-commerce catalog and their website based on that content consumption. Why? Because they were two separate systems, and they couldn't tie the two things together. And so if I'm a content practitioner and I can start to figure out ways to utilize the consumption of content on that blog and how it can help me automate and optimize what they might see in the e-commerce catalog or what they might see on the website, well, then I've done two things. One is that I've connected the experience in a content model that actually makes sense for the business. And two, I've actually started to create data that helps me optimize a business result, which in this case was more sales and more ultimately better, more targeted cross-sell and upsell opportunities by looking at the content that they had actually consumed on the blog. But by keeping them in silos, we're sort of guessing. We sort of look at it and go, oh, and we have to have a manual process to do that. But now if I'm a content practitioner and I can do that and I can start to use that data to give us better and shorter time intervals between us creating that content and the time we can optimize and create insight against that content, well, now I've supported a business goal, not just a content goal. The content goal is, yeah, get the blog up quickly. The business goal is get the blog up, but tie it into a method for us to improve a business result, which is more sales on the actual website. That's one thing, which is creating a more efficient process. Two, on the other side of that extreme, is how do we start using our strengths and talents to create better content? In other words, how do we start? I was just working with a university this week while I'm here in Detroit, and the university's challenge was they have so many people that want to create content, and quite frankly, they're not very good at it. They write content, and so because they don't want to upset anybody and because they're trying to get as much content as they can out, they publish it all. And so what that does is that it creates this glut, this high amounts of quantity of content, but the quality isn't very good. So there's a high cost and a very low return. And so this person really is creating a group to focus on writing better, creating more compelling experiences, and quite frankly, telling those that are writing and creating content that they would normally just publish to the web, you know what, you need to stop, or you need to change, or you need to help us become and do this better. So they're actually reducing the amount of content that they create and really spending time and money and effort on focusing on the quality of it so that they're improving the experiences more broadly. Thus, they're decreasing costs and actually ultimately over time improving results. And so if you can start to focus on just one of those two, whichever your skills and interests and desires really focus on. Maybe you're a data or a technical person and you really want to focus on that part of it. Getting into content structures and taxonomies and using metadata and applying metadata can really help you do that. On the other side, maybe you're creative and you really want to focus on content quality, and you'll focus on writing better questions, or better content rather. And hopefully that can help this person sort of sort out what they're trying to do.
Well, great. Me too. Chris, I hope this answers your question and you can start adding value to your content today with this example. So in the meantime, we have another question from Celia, Robert. Celia is wondering, what is the impact of intelligent content, you think, on the Internet of Things?
Oh, it's huge, right? I mean, this is something where this is something where we really start to look at what is not only what is the data, but what are the interfaces that we have to look at. So there's sort of two pieces to the Internet of Things, right? One is how do we start to use data that we can get from, for example, beacons or physical objects that can tell us about the usage of a product or a thing, and sort of using that data to help us optimize or even generate content for public consumption. The more sort of intelligent content practice I would look at is all of those Internet of Things. You know, you think about your thermostat or the refrigerator or all the things. All of those have interfaces that will sort of show out to a customer content. In other words, we have to write content that will be displayed on the refrigerator or that will be displayed on the thermostat. You know, and that is everything from technical how-tos to what we're doing to even marketing content in some cases. And so operating from a standpoint of how do we manage content and looking at all those things that we just talked about, like how do we structure it using a taxonomy? How do we actually look at a content model that identifies widgets of content that will actually, in some cases, be displayed in various devices? And we're going to have to write for it, and we're going to have to create content for it. And all of that's going to have to work together to not only manage what we're saying about the website and the blog and all that, but also what are we saying actually on the device? What does the device say? And how do we manage the how-to and the instructions for all of those devices? And in many times, real time, right? I can imagine us having conversations with customer help through the device, right? So through our refrigerator, you can contact customer service and have a conversation with a rep right there in the actual device. That's coming. And so thinking about content management in a way that helps create a process flow for that will be imperative. And thus, creating a content model and a taxonomy and an ability to separate our presentation from the content we manage will be a paramount thing for us to do as content practitioners.
That's such an exciting future you're depicting there. I can already see it in front of me. So we have still a little bit of time left, and so I have one more question.
Sure.
I think you touched upon this topic already, but maybe you can somehow summarize, or maybe this is because he needs to convince his boss, because his question is, could you explain why structuring your content is important for marketing, I guess for marketing in general?
Yeah, and I think the answer to that is quite frankly because what I see so often is marketing departments having to recreate the wheel for every single device they're doing. And so in other words, we're having to recreate content for mobile interfaces, for social interfaces, for even the Internet of Things interfaces, but even for multiple websites. A simple example is how does the right rail reflect the most relevant blog posts that we're writing, right? So the right rail of our website. And so a great application of marketing content is to say, listen, here's our e-commerce catalog, and to the right of that, here are all the blog posts that relate to those products. And so just something that simple would usually take, very, very long time for us to manually do. But it's a very simple thing to solve if we structure our content in the right way. Just having a tagging structure within the blog to say, let's tag the blog post with products. we won't use it necessarily for display in the blog, but we can use an RSS feed of the product feed to show in relevant product pages so that we're showing relevant content for those that, quite frankly, may not be convinced that this product they need, and so they go, oh, well, here's a blog post talking about how it works or why this customer solved this particular issue. Let's click over to the blog and see what that's all about. And then back, right? So in the blog, have relevant products that are sort of relevant, and of course, structuring our e-commerce catalog to sort of, and that cross-pollination of marketing content across all the different interfaces that we're creating is such an important piece of creating an efficient process that drives the need to create less content, but use it in more places. And that's the biggest benefit of actually taking the time to structure it well. Right.
Well, we have one more question for you, Robert. Are you ready for it?
Sure. Yeah.
All right, here comes. This is from an anonymous writer. He or she is wondering, yeah, we don't know in this case, but he or she is saying, with a number of easy-to-use tools for modeling and authoring intelligent content available today, how do we harness them to existing web content management platforms to optimize delivery of the customer's digital experience across their entire journey and touch points?
That's a great question. It's a really, really great question, and it's one that's, you know, it's certainly a broad topic and probably broader than we have time for today, but here's the short answer to that question. Yes, you are correct. There are lots of great tools to help you out there to structure, create structured content, to be able to really componentize and atomize your content down to really whatever level you want. And there's a balance there for sure, right? You know, how granular is too granular? It's going to be unique to your business. But those tools themselves, the really good ones, will quite frankly integrate very well with the CMS tools that are helping you present and manage the optimization of that content across different channels. And so whether or not you buy one tool that actually does all of that and your sort of content structure and content normalization needs are light, and there are plenty of businesses where this is true, right? Not everybody needs the same level of granularity. When you start talking about e-commerce businesses or big enterprises that have thousands and tens of thousands of products that they need to, or tens of thousands of different kinds of, you know, business units and languages and all of that, versus a smaller business or a nonprofit that quite frankly is trying to do one thing well. Okay, of course your content structure needs are going to vary intensely. And so maybe one solution will meet your light content structure needs but really handle your content presentation needs well, or maybe you need a suite of tools to actually manage the acquisition, normalization, and structure of content, and then you need another tool to actually help you optimize it, provide marketing automation, and provide some of the data that you're going to need to actually personalize that content across multiple channels. And so I think it's a spectrum that you have to look at as you start looking at the different tool sets that are available and start thinking about where am I going to, and this is quite frankly where you add value, right? Where, as a content practitioner, understanding the needs of your organization first and then applying a technology solution to it later is the key there.
Well, great. That was actually the last question. So thank you so much for really taking the time to elaborate your answer on these questions.
Absolutely my pleasure.
Well, then, ladies and gentlemen, being mindful of your time, I have to unfortunately close this Q&A session for now. We can get back to you individually answering the questions you might have. Just get in touch with us. Of course, this isn't the end. Please check out the Hippo channel on Brad Talk for more videos, or get in touch with us through social media. As I mentioned in the beginning, this webinar has been recorded and will be made available on demand on Brad Talk. Don't forget to leave a rating. We appreciate any feedback on this webinar. So with that, I would like to thank you all for joining us today, and thank you so much, Robert, for sharing your expertise with us. I hope you enjoyed it.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys. Yeah, no, it's always fun, always fun.
Great. Well, then I wish everyone a great remaining Wednesday, and so long from Amsterdam.